Hello and welcome. My name's Mark Smith, although I'm generally known as GD2K online for reasons that aren't as interesting as they might sound. And I joined MongoDB in December last year, so I've been there for about 7 months. And before that, I worked with a whole bunch of databases like MySQL and Postgres, SQLite, CouchDB, Redis, Solr, but I'd never really touched MongoDB. So it's been a real learning experience over the last few months. And I've learned two fundamental things. One is that MongoDB is awesome, and the other is that almost everything anyone says about MongoDB online is wrong. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes hopefully setting some things straight and busting some myths about MongoDB. But first, there's this animation on YouTube where two dogs have an argument about how great MongoDB is. And it's quite popular. But on my first day at MongoDB, a really good friend of mine sent me a link to this video in case I hadn't seen it. But it was published in 2010 and it's been circulating around the internet since then. It's 10 years old. And you all think that nobody at MongoDB has seen this video, but nothing could be further from the truth. For example, this is my colleague Max, and he, like everyone else at MongoDB, has seen the video on YouTube. He's also bought the t-shirt that he's wearing that says MongoDB is web scale. You'll also see stickers on MongoDB employees' laptops with his character on. So please stop posting links of this video to MongoDB employees in case we haven't seen it. It's really quite out of date now, although it was funny at the time. Thank you. So now we've got that out of the way, let's have a very brief overview of MongoDB. So MongoDB is a clustered database. If you don't want to lose your data and you want your data to be available, you need a minimum of 3 machines. You need an odd number so that they can get together and have an election and pick a machine that will be your primary. And when your client connects to the cluster, it will find out which machine is currently the primary, and then all queries are routed through that machine. It's the primary server's job to stream any updated data to the secondaries. So this isn't for scalability, this is really just for redundancy. So what do we store in this database cluster? Well, we store collections of documents that are analogous to tables of rows in a relational database. And this document on the right is an example of one document. So a document is basically a dict in Python terms. It's keys and values. And this record specifically is from our sample movie database. It's a movie from 1893 that's 1 minute long and involves a blacksmith hammering at an anvil and then opening a beer and passing it around. It's basically like a TikTok video from 1893, which I think is kind of cool. But I want to highlight a couple of things. And the first thing is this data is hierarchical. So you can store things like arrays and other dictionaries as values. So you can really work with this in a multi-dimensional way. It's a much richer data structure than just a flat row in a relational database. The other thing is that there are some value types in here that aren't JSON. So the first value here, the ID, is an object ID, and further down you'll see that the released value is a Python datetime. Now it's not stored as a Python value in the database, it's stored as a MongoDB timestamp value in the database, but it's just worth noting that that this isn't JSON that we're storing, but it is kind of similar, and I'll get to that in a second. So our first big myth is that MongoDB is on version 2.4. If you apt install MongoDB on Debbie and Jesse, you get version 2.4. But version 2.4 was released in 2013, and there have been 7 major annual releases since then. We've actually rewritten the storage engine since then, so it's a very different database today to how it was 7 years ago. This is a bit like using Python 2.6, 2.7 instead of 3.8. If you want to install a recent version of MongoDB, Google for MongoDB community, go to the documentation page on the MongoDB website and follow the instructions for installing it on your Linux, Mac or Windows box. The second myth is that MongoDB is a JSON database. This myth is so pervasive, it's actually written on the homepage of MongoDB right now, although there is a caveat later. MongoDB is a BSON database, and this may sound like a trivial, nitpicky thing, but it's kind of fundamental. So firstly, BSON is much more efficient to store and traverse than JSON. But also it includes some extra data types that aren't included in JSON. Things like binary blobs and date times, decimal numbers that are good for storing currency data. And it's important because BSON is totally fundamental to MongoDB. The network protocol you use to talk to MongoDB is BSON. The results are returned as BSON structs. Even the queries are BSON structs that are sent to MongoDB. MongoDB is a BSON database. Another myth you will see But really this is just an out-of-date fact, is that MongoDB doesn't support transactions, that it's not ACID compliant. But as of 2 years ago, this is no longer true. So 2 years ago, transactions were initially added to MongoDB, and then 1 year ago, they were extended to support sharded clusters. So MongoDB supports snapshot isolation and is an ACID compliant database. That said, because documents are a richer structure than a row, and you don't necessarily need so many relationships between collections, you don't necessarily need transactions so much. So an update to a single document, even if you're updating different parts of the document, is itself a transactional atomic operation. So you can often get away without using transactions, where you wouldn't get away with that in a more traditional relational database. Related to this is people will tell you MongoDB doesn't support relationships, and this is just fundamentally not true and hasn't been for quite some time. We support a type of query called an aggregation pipeline that supports a lookup operation that will bring in related records from another collection and embed them in the resulting document in an array, which is really nice, but it's making use of the multidimensional nature of a document by embedding it in your single document rather than duplicating rows from that document so that it can support the one-to-many relationship that it's modeling. Another thing that people will talk about in a big way is sharding, and it is a cool feature of MongoDB that it supports sharding out of the box. It used to be a really, really important thing because you couldn't make efficient use of multi-core processors without using a thing called micro-sharding. Since the storage engine was rewritten 5 years ago, that hasn't been necessary. So sharding is only really necessary for vast data sets that really can't conceivably fit on one machine. Before you look at sharding, if you've got a large data set, it's definitely worth buying more RAM if you can afford it, buying a faster processor if you can afford it, or buying a much bigger disk if you can afford it. Sharding adds some limitations to the types of queries you can run, so ideally you should look at upgrading your hardware first. Or, even better, get MongoDB itself to host the database for you. So MongoDB has a platform called Atlas, and as well as being able to scale up and down your cluster automatically based on your usage, it'll handle backups, redundancy, and it includes a bunch of other features like free text search and charting and serverless functions and things to work with your data. People will tell you that MongoDB is insecure, and I think this is slightly unfair. I think if you connect a MongoDB instance with no authentication on it to a network without a firewall, or you open up the MongoDB port on a firewall to any machine on the internet, then you're kind of asking people to connect to your server and steal your data, or as happens these days, encrypt all your data within your MongoDB instance and add a document telling you where to send Bitcoin to have it unlocked. This has been kind of fixed in that MongoDB will refuse to connect to the network now until you've got an authentication collection and usernames and passwords in your database. But if you really, really want to connect an insecure MongoDB instance to the internet, there's only so much we can do to stop you. A rather persistent myth about MongoDB is that it loses data. And the truth is you can lose data in any database. And MongoDB offers more options for trading off between performance and resiliency. So you should definitely read the documentation about robustness and how you want to store the data within the cluster. But fundamentally, if you know what you're doing, MongoDB is durable. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be trusted by huge banks like Morgan Stanley and Barclays, who are big customers, or a bunch of other companies that rely on their data being stored reliably and consistently. And the final myth that really sums up all the other myths is that MongoDB is really easy. But it's really easy to get started. But if you, like any other tool, the more effectively you know how to use it, the better your use of that tool will be. And you should check out the MongoDB documentation and MongoDB University, which is a bunch of courses, many of which are free, really diving into different topics about MongoDB. So thank you very much for listening. And now you, unlike most people on the internet, will hopefully be mostly right about MongoDB, at least some of the time. Thank you.